This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Timothy Alcock, Douglas O'Keefe, and Phil Spreck, who all just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 563 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new movie Dune Part 2, which adapts the second half of Frank Herbert's 1965 novel Dune. And we previously discussed the first Dune movie back in episode 491, so definitely check that out if you missed it. And this will include spoilers for everything in Dune Part 2, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 35th appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers' Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's been a television writer, producer, and script supervisor for shows such as Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Chew, and WWE's Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown. And she's currently a writer for Pixelberry Studios. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Excited to be back, Dave.
Then next up, we've got Matthew Kressel, making his 33rd appearance on the show. His novel Queen of Static, the follow-up to his groundbreaking novel King of Shards, is available now, and he recently launched a newsletter of writing advice over at outerdeep.substack.com. Together with Ellen Datlow, he hosts the monthly Fantastic Fiction reading series in New York City. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Always good to be here.
And also joining us today is Rajan Khanna, making his 24th appearance on the show. He's the author of the post-apocalyptic novels Falling Sky, Rising Tide, and Raining Fire. And his short fiction appears in magazines such as Analog, Lightspeed, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. His articles have appeared on Tor.com and LitReactor.com. So Raj, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm always happy to discuss Dune with you guys, although I might need some spice in the future to last through everything, so to extend my life a little bit.
Okay, so let's start off with Andrea and have you tell us about your expectations going into Dune Part 2.
Expectations were high after the first one. I had a few quibbles on the first one, but nothing really big. So I was hoping this would be as good or better. And I tried to avoid any of the hype. I saw a lot of people who had seen previews saying it's the greatest thing ever. And I'm just like, I'm trying to avoid them because I hate going into movies with expectations. But wow,
Wait, don't give us your verdict yet.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sorry. Yes. Yes, those are my expectations.
Yeah. I mean, I had high expectations. I mean, I loved the first part, and I guess I was expecting this to be, like a solid continuation of the first part. I mean, I like the first half of the novel better than the second half. So, and like when you're talking about the David Lynch movie, for example, like which covers the whole book, the second half is way, way worse, in my opinion, than the first half. So I was expecting this to be like an equally competent treatment of a story that I liked a little bit less. So I thought it was going to be, like really good. But I would say I had kind of reasonable expectations. But then, I started seeing kind of like that this was, I think at one point it was like 97% on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that. And the first one's like 83. And I was like, I just, it can't be that much better than the first one. Come on. The first one was so good, So those were kind of my expectations going in. But how about Matt? What were your expectations going in?
So I assiduously avoided reading any reviews of this before I went to the theater. The only thing I did was I rewatched the first film 2 days before just to have it fresh in my head. And like I still think the first one is a great film, but you watch it a few times and you can see there are places where it sags a little and maybe they could have tweaked a little bit. So I was like, I went in, I'm like, Denis Villeneuve is one of my favorite directors right now, and so I had high expectations, but I tried to temper my expectations and just kept my mind as open as possible for the experience. I didn't really want to, I guess, preface my my expectations.
And how about Raj? What were your expectations going in?
I mean, I guess they were mixed. I think that, the things that happen in the second half of the novel, there are some pretty big ones, like Paul achieving his destiny and all that kind of stuff, the sandworms. And so I was expecting a certain different, I guess, weightiness to what was coming, but I also think I was dreading it because I feel like every time, one of these adaptations comes out, I'm like bracing myself for something that not necessarily is going to be bad, because I didn't think he would make something that was bad, but that doesn't jibe with what like I had come to envision in my head or something like that. So, but I mostly, I think like Matt, I just tried to keep myself blank and just go in and like let it hit me when I sat there. So yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was definitely looking forward to like the sandworm charge at the climax and stuff like that. But I was sort of apprehensive about, like in the Lynch movie, there's all this sort of psychedelic stuff and like hands flying at the camera and things like that. And I wasn't sure how how this new movie would handle that sort of stuff. And and there's also there's a lot of like time jumps and montages, and the second half of the novel takes place over, I don't know, a couple of years. And so that we actually, in some of our earlier episodes, there was a lot of discussion about how are they going to handle that. That's a tricky thing. So all that stuff made me think that this was maybe going to be a little bit less, a little bit maybe uneven compared to the first one. But so then getting back to Andrea, so just tell us about your experience of sitting in the theater and watching Dune Part 2. What was that like?
Well, I went to a morning showing, 10 o'clock in the morning on day one, March 1st. And there weren't too many people in the theater, and that's the way I like it. So it's just me smack dab in the middle of the theater, big old screen. I didn't see it in IMAX. I saw it at standard. And just sitting there waiting. And it starts and I'm totally on board and it's beautiful and it's lovely. And then, I don't use the word masterpiece, quickly or easily or often. But it seemed almost very soon that this was something special. This was something else. And it bore out through the entire movie that it just surpassed not just the first movie, but almost everything I've seen prior to this. I think the only other movie that I can think of recently that I've gone, wow, that's a masterpiece was, Blade Runner 2049 and
by the same director.
Yes, by Denis Villeneuve. So, it's got it in every way. It's a masterpiece in scale, in scope, the acting, the directing, the music, the cinematography. There's not a foot out of place. There's nothing I could even remotely say, oh, maybe they should have done this different. Nothing. It was just perfect. And I don't know if you want me to go into this, but he made some changes to the story, and I spent a good portion of at the beginning of the film, I kept going, well, is this from the book? Is this the way it was in the book? And then after a while, I just realized I don't care. This is its own thing, and he is taking me to a place better than the book. It's kind of like, it's so easy to say why you don't like a movie, or at least for me. And it's hard to pinpoint unless we're going to sit here for several hours and I go through point by point by point why I love this movie, why this is a masterpiece. But you got to let yourself sit back and watch it as a whole and take it in. And it's just, I was crying. Mm-hmm. At some point, like several points, I gasped. I put my hand, the whole battle at the end, I had my hand over my mouth in just awe. I mean, like there aren't enough superlatives that I can really sit here and roll out for you.
You said on Twitter something like, "I saw the face of God in that theater."
Yeah, I walked out of there. I'm like,
Shai Halud.
Shai Halud.
Yeah.
It was like a religious experience. I mean, it like genuinely, it was awe-inspiring the way you feel in church if you're, very religious.
And you actually told us over email that you wanted to go back and see it again the same day.
I did.
On IMAX.
I did. I got home. I started to Google IMAX to see it in IMAX, and everything was sold out.
Right.
And then I was like, well, let's try the next day. And that was all sold out. And then they're showing 3 a.m. shows, and I'm like, well, could I try to get sleep, stay awake for that? And I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea. But even those were sold out. Like everything was sold out. So actually I did in fact go back yesterday to see it. I went because Tuesdays are discount days in New York in theaters. So I went to see it on Screen X, which I don't recommend because it distorts the picture. So don't do that. But I am going again tomorrow. Me and Ella Dallow are going to see it in IMAX. And
Wow.
I don't care. I love it that much. Like I've been obsessed with it for days. I spent all the day, what was it, Saturday? Googling the movie, reviews, reading everything I could about it. I'm obsessed the way you're obsessed when you're a kid. Like it brought back that joy of a great story that I felt when I was 14. And like you and I left the theater yesterday, I was like the first time in 40 years, I really, really wanted to tape a movie poster up to my bedroom wall.
Okay, so it sounds like Andrea liked the movie.
Yeah, I kind of liked the movie.
How about Matt? What was your experience like watching the movie?
So I saw it at the Alamo Draft House, and we got the tickets in the front row. That was all that's available. So like when we first sat down, you're like looking, you're craning your neck.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, oh God, this is going to be bad. And like the theater was sold out. There's no way we're moving. So like for the first like minute or so, or maybe 5 minutes, two things happened. One, I was like, oh, they literally just picked up right where the first movie leaves off. I'm like, yes, that's awesome. Like it's literally almost the next scene. Like it's right there. And then I would say between like 5 and 10 minutes in, I was so immersed in the movie and so like engrossed that I think I was on the edge of my seat for the whole movie. Some of those shots of like, for example, like the Harkonnen ships blowing up the Siege, or the sandworm, the riding the sandworm, like I'm right there, and the sound is just like all around me, and I'm like, I'm on Arrakis, I'm on Dune. I just felt it like more than I've ever felt a movie in a long, long time. Yeah, it's one of the best films I've ever seen, and I'm jealous that you've seen it 3 times already.
Twice. Like I'm going again tomorrow.
Oh, right. I'm going. I want to go see it again. It's really busy, but I've been really busy. But I have to see it on IMAX now because like one of the things about sitting so close was like I couldn't absorb the whole screen. I was like very focused on parts, so I want to just go like back a little bit and see the grandeur of it. But wow, like that it's like it made me fall. Like I love movies, obviously, but it made me like fall in love with the power of seeing something on a big screen. That's good. Like you have to see that on a big screen. You could watch it on your home, big giant flat screen, but it's not going to be the same thing as the theater.
Okay, so now I'm very curious what Raj thought, because Raj was sort of our dissenting voice on Dune Part 1.
I'm always the dissenting voice. I feel like I'm the resident stick in the mud when it comes to this kind of stuff. Well,
let me just explain. So Raj said about Part 1, he thought it was, like beautiful and, good writing and everything, but it sort of left him cold emotionally, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to be caveat man right now because I definitely, it was stunning, visually, audially, or auditorially. I mean, I took Friday off to go see it because I I'd given up some vacation. I'm like, I'm going to take Friday. I'm going to go see Dune. I went to like a 3:00 showing. I didn't go to IMAX, but I went to Dolby, AMC's Dolby thing, and it's still a huge screen. And the sound was so powerful that when, like there's those parts where they're on, the gladiatorial combat's going, or like other parts, and it's like just goes, like that big like drone. It shook the seats. I mean, like it was you could feel it vibrating through your body, and that it just felt like part of the movie and part of the power of the movie. So I was very impressed by that. I appreciated a lot of the changes that were made, but I think so. My reception is colored by a few things. One is, I was kind of analyzing it the whole time through, being like, oh, that's a change, or oh, they did that, or wasn't this supposed to happen? And like, so I wasn't able to sit there as an audience member who was just coming in to have it, streamed at him. So that, that doesn't allow for the most natural viewing experience. Two, I'm really close to these books, and I know everyone that we're talking with right now is as well, but
I'm not really.
Okay, well, but I mean, when it comes to things that I've envisioned in my head for, decades now, it's hard for me to watch an adaptation and feel like it matches up to what's been in my head. Like the actors are approximations of things, but they're, not necessarily right. And so there's a sort of dissonance that is just always there. And then the third thing is, you mentioned my reaction to the first one, but it's also been my reaction to a lot of Denis Villeneuve's films. And like out of all of them, my favorite is Sicario, the early one, because there was something human about it that I was easily able to connect with. And the rest of his stuff since then has been like all science fiction, right? And mostly adaptations are playing in a pre-existing world. And so it's not a new thing. It's sort of a continuation or a reinterpretation of a thing that already exists. Even Arrival, right? An adaptation. But I will say this. I recently rewatched Arrival for, I think, only the second time since seeing it in the theater. And I struggled with it in the theater, but I really loved it when I saw it the second time. And I was like, oh, this was good. I don't know what I was having issues with the first time. So I suspect it's going to be one of those things where this first time viewing it, it was, sort of my taking it in, comparing it to the original, seeing how it all fit together. And then the second time going in, that will all drop away and I'll be able to like take it as it should be, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say, I mean, this was way better than I was expecting. I had just like a couple like things, mostly toward the ends, that like, were maybe like not pitch perfect to me. But I mean, I think it's sort of like you're saying, Raj, that they were just like not what I was expecting from the book or something. And I feel like if I were to watch it again, having appropriate expectations, that it would all I'd be like, oh yeah, this seems great. I mean, I've only seen it once, but that's sort of my impression just thinking back on it. But yeah, like, because I thought the first one was epic, that it was just like blew my mind. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing on screen. And I don't know whether it's just like because I'm seeing this in a huge theater and sort of my memories of seeing the first one have faded a little bit, but this just seems like 10 times bigger somehow than the first movie. And just from that opening shot of the Harkonnen soldiers kind of floating up to the, to the cliff, I was just like, this just like looks real. This just looks like an actual like levitation, and they're just filming it. It just makes every other movie special effects just seem like nothing in comparison. I don't know what's so different about it, but it was just so
I feel
compelling.
I was thinking about that, and I think that I think they found their footing. I think that with the first film, they were probably learning things along the way and figuring out stuff. By the second film, they're like, okay, we got this. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. Everyone sort of settled into their characters. I appreciate, Raj, that you're like the counter opinion, because if there were all like four of us being like, this is amazing, and
It would just be like a church. It would be like going to church,
Yeah.
Right?
You need
Like-
a
Praise,
There'd be
praise
nothing to
Shai-Hulud.
say.
Praise Shai-Hulud.
I think you're right though, because I think the first film had to set up a lot of the language, especially if you're not used to Dune, like how the world works, how the technology works, the shields and all that. Like they were very careful in the first film to show how the shields worked, and the red meant that something was, not or was it penetrating?
Was
I don't
penetrating.
remember.
red is
Yeah.
penetrating. Yeah.
So like, I think in this film, they got to be like, you saw the first film, you know how it works now. We can just like unload it on you. And I think that worked to its benefit for sure.
Well, also, I mean, the first film, looking back on it, I mean, like so much of it is just people in rooms talking to each other, and
Yeah.
that's what happens in the book. So, I mean, they were kind of stuck with that, and they did their best to make the rooms look interesting and stuff. But this is like all out in the desert, and so it just feels so much more epic, and
Yeah, and just some of the shots, I think, like to add to the feeling of enormity. Some of the shots inside, like the Fremen Siege in the south, where you just see this enormous, like cathedral like space, and then there's like an aerial shot of Paul walking through a group of Fremen, and
Oh god, that shot was unbelievable.
like the way they shot everything. Obviously the sandworms. Oh my god. Just felt epic, and I think that was an intentional choice. I think I'd like to go back and like watch the first film and then this film with an eye towards that stuff, because I think the first film starts off very small and personal. It's like Paul is asleep and it's raining and he's eating breakfast with his mother, and she's like, use the voice, Paul. I don't want to use the voice, Mom. And then you go from that to like him commanding an army to take over the known universe.
But that's interesting, because this movie is all about him not wanting to become a legend, not wanting to become basically the prophesied one that he doesn't believe happens. And so the scale does change. So like, if that's an intentional choice, that's pretty brilliant actually. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess the first thing I want to talk about is that I felt like the first movie was basically an interpretation of Dune, an interpretation of the book. Like everything that happens in the movie is basically like, oh yeah, I remember that in the book, and maybe you might imagine it differently or whatever, but this is basically just like all scenes from the book. And this movie seemed to me like basically like a rewrite of the book. Like so many of the scenes I don't think are in the book. I don't remember them. So many things are changed pretty dramatically. They're all like basically 99 to 100% good changes in my opinion, but they seem pretty dramatic. It seems like they made pretty dramatic changes to the material compared to the first movie. So that's the first thing I want to throw out. Does everyone agree with that? Does anyone not agree with that?
Like I said, I was thinking through it every time, and through the whole beginning, I was like, "Is this happen? Did this happen? Did this happen?" And like I said, I didn't care. But I think the changes, and I think probably that's a good thing, because it let me let go of the expectations and enjoy it as its own thing. This became its own creature, its own creation. But I think the things that he brought out and the things that he changed weren't quite changes, but I think it's what he did was tease out the actual themes of the story more, as opposed to just going along with what's text in the book, like the love story. And I think a couple of months ago when we were trading when the trailers and the teasers started coming out, and we started trading them back and forth in email, and they it was the scene on the dune where they're talking and falling in love. And I remember commenting, I'm like, this seems like they're going to lean into the love story. And I love that. It's great. And seeing it all play out, like in the book, it's more like, oh, it's, he dreams about her and it's destiny. But we don't actually see them falling in love. I don't feel it. This, we see the love story. We see why they fall in love. And it's sweet and it's quiet and it's real. And I understand why they love each other. And it just is, that's one of the parts where I was crying. I think that Dune scene where they're talking about, where he's telling her about, the seas on Caladan, and what, you swim in the water. And the scene where she teaches him how to sandwalk, it was like watching two kids dancing, and it was so beautiful. And I was just tearing
Right.
up.
But this is what I'm saying though, is that like, if you're talking about this specific scene and this specific dialogue, I feel like this is not, like there's so many scenes I feel like are not from the book at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like
Well, I
it's
think
like the stuff you're just the scene on the dune, the scene where she's teaching him to sandwalk,
it's not in the book.
Harkonnen soldiers at the beginning, like basically all the action scenes are not explicitly from the book. They're sort of implied, or it's like the same general outline, but they're essentially inventing all the specifics and all the dialogue and everything.
I think there are a few different reasons. I think one is that, to make a better movie, they needed to give characters that were going to be in it an arc, and Herbert doesn't do that. Like, for example, Phage shows up right at the end just for that fight and doesn't really do much else. And so they needed to give him like more of something to do so that when he does show up, it feels like important and it pays off something. And I think that was smart. And I think that all the stuff with Chani was smart. I think the Irulan stuff was smart, all of that stuff. And it's sort of what audiences expect, right? Like they expect to see somebody start in place and carry on and have a satisfying ending. But I think the other thing, if I can just say, is that the book can be subtle sometimes. And, obviously we've talked about how some people read Dune and come away thinking Paul is this amazing prophesied hero when Herbert intended it to be a cautionary tale against this kind of...
Yeah, I think when you say some people, I think like 99.9% of people.
And I think Denis Villeneuve went in saying like, no, I'm going to make this explicit right on top to the point where people are going to talk about it. Paul's going to talk about it, and I think that needed to happen if they wanted to kind of take the spirit of the book, which I think was smart, again, because I think, granted, I like the subtleties in the book because it's a book, but I don't think you can do that in a movie as well. And I also think that I think they took great pains to subvert the white savior narrative because it's such a thing these days. It has become such a thing where the fact where Paul is even saying like, they should have one of their own leading them, not me. And I think that they needed to say that because otherwise it does just fall into the rut of all those other places. And I think they needed to at least point a finger at it and say like, but this happens for a reason. And it's the same reason it keeps happening, that it is mythologized in that way in many senses. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to say like the first film also interpolates stuff that's not in the book, right? Like, so, you have the breakfast scene. I don't remember that in the book. Yeah. And then, like the changing of the guard where the guild navigators and the emperor's person comes over and they he uses his ducal signet to leave a wax seal on the thing to change the guard. Like that was interpreted. So, I think it just gives credit to Denis as a filmmaker, as a director to know what to keep and what to throw away. And I think that, not to throw away, but, like the themes are all still there. And in fact, some of them are, like you said, Raj, are brought up front that, they're intentionally subverting the savior trope, the white hero trope. And that's what Herbert was trying to do, right? He was very explicit that he warned against the hero, the charismatic person. And what I like that they did with Chani is make her the skeptic. So it really sets up, I think, Dune Messiah, because there's, as we've talked about in this podcast, a huge growing mass of Fremen who are skeptical of Paul as being their Messiah. And I could see Denis deciding to make Chani part of that group. But I mean, I don't know if I agree that there was that much interpolation. I mean, I think it was like Andrea. Like I was just so carried along through it that I didn't care as much. But then when like things happened, I was like, oh yeah, that happened in the book.
Well, I will say that there's one big change that I generally was okay with most of the changes. The one that disappointed me, and I think it works for the movie the way that he did it, but I don't know why he couldn't give more time. But like no creepy Alia at the end, which is you know, sucks to me because that was one of my favorite moments. And then they only do Alia in that weird flashback with Anya Taylor. Flash forward, Anya Taylor Joy,
which I love, by the way. So I just want to say that, like, I was really, really curious at how they were going to do Jessica taking the water of life and how that was going to work. Like, and to your point, Dave, where you're like, oh, is it going to be all like this weird psychedelic stuff? And just that shot of the fetus in her womb and the blue like swirl just going over the fetus's face, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like, and then just the way they had Jessica talking to Alia in the womb was so creepy.
So creepy.
And like, and she just gets like really dark and evil in this. I mean, I think it's obvious by the later books, like how, you know, selfish, I guess, Jessica is in terms of what some of the things that she's done. But like, I don't think it came through in the first book as much.
Right.
But like
they
bring.
all.
Right.
I think
so
they have the benefit of the hindsight of, or having all of the books in front of them. I mean, Herbert didn't have those books written when he did the first one, so like they can see Jessica's arc and be like, okay, we can set this up right now. Whereas I think I would have, until we just read that novel, right? And I would have been like, ooh, she comes off as really harsh, but it's paid off now for me that in that way, how manipulative. Although I will say this. I wanted a little bit more psychedelic stuff, especially not necessarily with Jessica, but when Paul did it. Yeah. They really play that like very quietly. It comes out in that one scene where he starts telling people stuff about their grandmothers. Yeah. You know, that's the revelation we have of like what's happened to him. But I expected at least something more than that. Yeah.
But I think that's how like Denis Villeneuve has chosen to adapt these books. Is in the first books. In the first film, he basically left out all the stuff about mentats, about you know, Sook doctors, about the Spacing Guild, and in this, he basically left out all the weird psychedelic visions. It's like trimmed down to the minimum possible for the purposes of the plot, and the focus is, you know, strictly on the characters and their relationships, and so it takes this really like trippy psychedelic space opera thing, but tells it in this very relatable way. And I think that, you know, it's really great that audiences are responding to this, you know, like this. And I feel like this one has like broadened out beyond, you know, I feel like the first movie, basically like all the hardcore science fiction fans all went to see it and everything, and it did pretty well. But I feel like this one has become a cultural phenomenon, and like just everybody is going to see it. And I think that approach of like focusing on the relatable emotions rather than gonzo space opera stuff is why.
I think you have to balance the scale of this. I mean, it's literally like the entire known universe, right? Thousands of planets, you know, spanning the galaxy. And you have to ground that in something. And I think that's what they do. They ground it in character. And I think it's a really brilliant choice. I think that if you made it too trippy, too psychedelic, you might alienate some audiences. I do maybe agree.
Miss it though.
I was just going to say, like, there were times when like Paul is having these like visions and you see him just like walking through a desert and there are people on the ground. He's like millions starved and you don't really get a sense of the violence, but maybe we will later on. I do feel like maybe one or two more visions of what that might be would have worked. And if we're at the critique point, I will say that I just wanted a smidge more of Christopher Walken. Like, I love him so much. He's one of my favorite actors, and like I just felt like he was a little underutilized in this, and I didn't get a full sense of his, like, I know his character from the books, but like in this, he was just kind of saying stuff in the background, and I get it. It's like he's just sort of a pawn in this greater thing that's happening. But I just maybe another scene or two with him would have worked for me. But
yeah.
I, you know,
well, Okay, go ahead, Russ.
Sorry, I was just going to say quickly. I think you helped me kind of realize something, because he does cut out all that extra kind of stuff, but what he leaves in is the one faction, which is the Bene Gesserit, and I would say that broadening of, that explanation of what they do, and adding in like the three of them in that one scene with the Reverend Mother. That was one of my favorite changes, because they were, like when she says his levers are,
pain and humiliation.
Yeah, pain and humiliation, or whatever. And that was perfect. That was a perfect underlining of, this is what the Bene Gesserit do. This is what they're about. And I thought that was handled really well.
Well, there's an interview with Denis Villeneuve where he says, when he went to, I think it was the cinematographer, and the cinematographer says, like, what is your approach to this material? He's like, women. That's my approach to this material. This is like the Bene Gesserit, like, take on Dune, basically. Like, that's what I want to focus on. And so you see that, the female characters all get way bigger parts and are way more interesting.
Much more agency. They're not standing back being our women. Because I think this is a conversation we had when we discussed the book itself, where I was just like, the women are, chattel. They talk about how the Atreides bring their women, and their concubines and wives are kind of like on the side. And in this, and all the women have no real agency. Chani's just kind of like, I'll do whatever you want, Paul. I reread the last chapter of the book when I got back, just to see exactly what was changed. And Chani, through the whole thing, is like, I understand. It's fine. You have to do this. Do you want me to leave? And it's just like watching her actually be a real person and have agency. Is so it's so empowering to watch that, her not be just this little, desert trad wife.
And I thought that they set that up really well, where he's like, I'll love you until my dying breath. And, the moment where he's like, I'm going to marry Princess Irulan, and you see her face, and she like kind of knew it. She knew it was coming. And then she's like, yeah, no. And then she just goes off into the desert and, hails a worm. And I agree. I think that, like, the power of the Bene Gesserit, the scene where Margot is seducing Fade, and just the way they did the voice, and because I was like, how are they going to do this, and just how it's like, by the time you hear the voice, by the time you realize you've heard the voice, you've already done the command. and so, like, you hear her voice, but she's not speaking, because she's already said it and he's already done it. And like, I was like, oh, that's such a beautiful way of like capturing how like powerful they are. And then you're like, oh, she's seducing him. And then she's like, here's the pain box and the gum Jabbar. Like, I need to test you. Like I tested Paul. I'm like, yes. And by the way, while we're on that topic, I really liked the black and white
oh god,
yeah,
so good
palette for Getty Prime.
Oh yeah,
and they're like under our black sun, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, I was just like, how would that work in real life? I mean, I don't know if there's such a thing. I mean, I guess maybe if you only had a certain frequencies of light or something, but it was just like the idea that that's the world they live in, and just this like their whole like fascist culture, and the weird sort of I don't know what you would call them when they were in the gladiator ring. The
picadors.
Oh yeah,
that's what I started calling them.
Picadors, yeah,
those
like the insect like stuff.
They look like bulls.
They look like bulls, and they remind me of something of like maybe from Cirque du Soleil or something I've seen. Like, I feel like I've seen something like that.
Yeah, I've seen something like that too.
Mummenschanz,
horror films or something, I think.
Yeah, and it was just so creepy and great. And I love also that the Atreides guy is like, he gives a good fight. Like, he doesn't go down like he's just like, I'm going to the last, swing, like. and you're like, oh no,
Interesting trivia. That guy is actually the stunt coordinator for the movies.
Oh, nice.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Austin Butler was fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
like I was just blown away. You know, like Jesus Christ, I love the Lynch movie, but like Sting, but like this guy, like creepy, deadly. He nailed that voice, which sounded exactly like the Baron, you know, Stellan Skarsgård. He just inhabited that role in such a creepy way. I saw an interview with him where he's basically like, he wasn't sure how he was going to play it, and then they put the makeup on him and the black teeth, and he looked at himself in the mirror, and then it was like, okay, yeah, that's there it is. But yeah, that was impressive. And again, I think we needed to have him set up and show him doing this stuff that he does on Arrakis, so that in the end, like, you're like, okay, he's a worthy opponent for Paul, because otherwise he just kind of shows up out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first time we've ever seen that. It's the first time in any adaptation that we've seen Margot Fenring. And it's the first time I think we've seen that arena fight for Fade.
Yeah.
That the visuals on that were just unbelievable. The change from color when you're inside to when you go outside, it's black and white. It was just, I mean, you know, to think about this being a great film, it's not just the acting or the directing, it's the use of color to tell story, the use of music and color to tell story. Like that use of color. And then the other thing that he does is Chani's blue bandana, which she puts on after, which is emblematic of her love for Paul. It's this one bright burst of color in this essentially monochromatic film. Like that's real filmmaking, use of color to tell story, use of music to tell story. It's just, you know, and it's one of the many, many things that make this for me a perfect film.
One of my little nitpicks. Sorry. I was just going to say in the fight, because we were talking about the arena scene, you know, in the book, there's this like belt thing that poison belt needle or blade or something that Fade has. And, you know, we see him fighting drugged people and then, you know, then having to face one that wasn't drugged. I felt like there was an opportunity there where they could have explained this, you know, belt, you know, whatever it is that he uses that's sort of dishonorable that he could have then used in the fight with Paul. But I guess they went for like, you know, he's actually just a good fighter and Paul's a good fighter and we're just going to stab each other in the chest, I guess. But yeah, I thought that would have, I don't know, just again, as a book lover, it would have been a nice little touch. So
I feel like they were trying to intentionally go away from tropes. Like, so the other thing that I noticed, speaking of fight scenes, is like when Gurney Halleck fights Rabban, or Rabin, I think they say in this, and it's like, it's a fight, but it's not like, if this were a Marvel movie, that would be an epic battle that lasts 20 minutes. And it's like,
but that's not in the book. It's, I mean, like that was,
no, I know.
It was again a movie. I think that's like a giving the audience closure because we brought Gurney back. Yeah. So he should be able to kill the people who killed his family. But
I thought it was too fast though. I mean, like I didn't need a whole like choreographed thing, but if they were going to make it that fast, I felt like it maybe should have been like intercut with some other stuff, or you know, but more, yeah. You know, so that we had there was the implication that the fight went on longer. We don't have to see every punch and kick or whatever, but like I thought the way it was just like it seemed kind of like perfunctory, or like Rabban was just kind of like a terrible fighter or something. Like,
can I just ask you guys a question? What your thoughts are? Because you know, obviously this was one continuous time period. I mean, they do some jumps when they're taking down the spice mining, you know, devices and things like that. But in the book, it takes, I think it's 4 years that they're
2 years.
Or is it 2 years? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's time enough for Alia to be born.
No, right? How old is Alia at the end?
I think she's like 4 or something.
Is she 4? I thought she was.
Oh,
no.
I don't know.
Maybe
whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
They stretch it out, and then Paul's living out in the desert, and then, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I don't, you know, again, I think it works as it is, but I was just wondering why it would almost seem like it would make sense for Paul to be gaining these converts and things over years rather than, you know, I don't know. Maybe they just wanted it for dramatic pacing.
I think because it was going to be you'd have to introduce Alia.
Yeah.
And that's like a whole another subplot. And then she would have to be, like extremely precocious.
Yeah.
And then they'd be like, how do we have
It's
a
hard to do
2-year-old speaking as an adult?
Yeah.
And so I think they made the wise decision. And then we didn't really talk about the fact that in the book, Paul and Chani have Leto II, and who dies. And that's when Paul's like, oh, I missed that. My prescience didn't see that. Which they cut out. And I think it makes sense because that's again, an entirely other subplot that would have just extended the movie beyond, 2 hours.
I thought it was a great, because we, in our earlier episode, we talked a lot about like, oh, this is such a problem. How are they going to handle this? And, and they just, the way they did it was so elegant, and it just got rid of all the problems. And also I thought that was a really good change.
I think thematically, the Baron is Paul's kill.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was okay with that part.
And that was such a great scene where he just walks past them, around them, goes right to the Baron, and just sticks the fucking knife in his throat. And it was just, I thought that was perfection.
I will say this, that what people who know me know that like one of my favorite types of movies is like revenge movies. And this isn't necessarily a revenge movie, but the part where like Paul shows up with the Fremen and the Sardaukar there, and they just don't care, and he's just walking around talking to people, and like they just house everyone that they see, like that. Those kind of scenes just give me something that I don't know, like it's some kind of satisfaction that no other kind of I don't know. It just is very satisfying. So like definitely that scene was when they take the capital essentially, like that's amazing. They take the emperor and all that. I love it.
Can we talk about? Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I was just going to say that this might be a long point. So if you want to say something else, go ahead.
It's probably going to be a tangent, but I was just going to say that when I watch movies, specifically science fiction movies, I'm always really looking at the sets, like for like flaws. That's just the way my brain works. I'm like looking at every little detail. And like, I didn't find any in this. I looked and again, I was sitting in the front row, so maybe I didn't see as clearly, but like just the level of detail in this, so I was just thinking of like the palanquin that they have the Lady Jessica ride in. I'm like, how are they going to carry the Lady Jessica on the back of and then they just like, it's basically like this little, almost like a seed pod. It's an aerodynamic seed pod that they lock her into, and she rides it. And it was like, yes. And it's made out of spice fiber. I'm like, what's spice fiber going to look like? And it's just like this organic, almost like snake scales. It looked like, but yeah, anyway, what were you going to say, Andrew?
I was just going to say regarding the battle scene, about a week or so ago, I sat and watched all three of the Lord of the Rings movies.
Me too, actually.
Yeah, and honestly, it's the first time I watched them in a while, and I came out of it with a lot of new thoughts that I won't go into. One, because that's not what we're talking about, and two, because people are going to get angry at me, and I don't need I don't need that kind of heat. But the thing I want to talk about is that the last movie, The Battle of Gondor. We're talking about storytelling, visual storytelling. I was sitting there watching this battle, and it just goes on and on and on. It's like a 20-minute scene. It felt like hours. And the whole time I'm just keep looking at the clock, and I'm like, when are we going to can we just get to the Eowyn killing the Wraith King part? Can we just get to Aragorn coming with the army of the dead? Like, why am I looking at the same shot of fighting over and over again? And it just became tedious. And I want to contrast that with the battle scene here at the end here, where it's just the spare use of these film, in that, we start with they blow a hole in the ship or the building, and then they hit the atomics, hit the mountain, and then the Fremen ride in and the worms in the battle, and the Sardaukar run, and Paul crests the Dune at the head of a vast Fremen army, and they engage with the Sardaukar, and there's some fighting scenes. But it never lingers on all that. It tells you what's going on. You see the battle, you see the brutality of it. And then you cut to inside, and there's the emperor and his retinue, and they're surrounded by guards, and they're looking at the door, and you hear battles and explosions, and it's getting closer and closer and closer. And then the doors open, and in this blow of dust and sand and darkness, and the Sardaukar line up with their swords, and they advance in lockstep, and they walk into the darkness, and then there's silence. And then the next thing you see is just Paul with the Fremen just come right out of the darkness. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, you tell an entire story without like extensive shots of people hitting each other with swords. And it's like spare and beautiful. And you don't need to know, you know what happened to the Sardaukar, but you don't need to see it because you know what happened, and it tells the story, and it's even more sinister. And it's just like, I know we're talking about Peter Jackson who couldn't cut a shot if he tried. But this was just like so beautiful. I never felt bored. It was not tedious. It was exciting. It was sinister. It was everything a battle scene should be.
Okay.
And
could I actually ask on the subject of the fight scenes and the battle scenes? One thing I was a little confused about still is that, like, I thought that the shields were a big part of the first movie. And it seems like people did not have shields very much, like personal shields.
You can't have a shield in the desert because it attracts the worm.
Yeah.
But if you're like fighting around a sand crawler, like a spice harvester thing, aren't the worms already coming anyway?
I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know. Maybe they come quicker.
It just seems like they had all sorts of like laser sniper guns and all sorts of...
the Ornithopter had a shield, right? So that's why the shield came. He said the shield comes down when they fire, which is why he had to distract them, right? In that one scene. So I guess they can use shields in the sky. I don't know. That was
like the scene where Paul's like running behind the column on the spice harvester thing. I don't understand why they don't have shields like at that part if they're like people are firing machine guns at them and stuff like that.
Yeah, that I don't know.
It's a good question. We'll ask Denis next time.
All right. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing anything because I really liked the shields in the first movie, and it seemed like that was.
Well,
like
I think
personal shields almost didn't feature at all in this one.
Yeah, because in the book they say that they almost never used lasers because if a laser hits a shield, it creates an atomic explosion.
Yeah.
And then in the movie, they're just like, yeah, we're having lasers. But I love that it's not like a Star Wars laser. It's just like this bolt of light. Like it's actually the way a real laser would work. It's instant. And
it was super cool. It was amazingly cool. I didn't understand like why are they fighting with knives here if there's have like machine guns here and like that stuff. Like I just wasn't sure what the like balance of power between the different weapons and stuff was.
Weren't they using actual artillery as opposed to? I mean, they're lasers, but she's got a bazooka when she shoots down the ornithopter,
right?
And when they attack the Sieges, doesn't the Baron go, artillery?
That's right.
Old-fashioned artillery. Yeah.
Old-fashioned artillery.
But they did seem to use some those lasers on the mining things.
Yeah,
but I guess the mining things can't have shields if they're harvesting spice.
Yeah.
So it made sense to me, I guess. I did like that scene where we're talking about battles. That I mean, it wasn't from the book at all, but I think it illuminates, like Raban trying to like kill everyone, and they just land in the desert, and it's all like dark and misty, and then you just have like the Fremen taking people out. But my favorite part about that is when that guy jumps on the ornithopter and for Muad'Dib, and it's like it shows what we see sort of told in the book, but that these people have turned fanatical and are willing to die for Muad'Dib at this point in time. So
Raj, I want to ask you, since you're a musician, what did you think of Gurney Halleck playing his balisette like that? There's like that one brief scene where he's playing.
I mean, I wish there was more, and I kind of was that was a part where I was like, oh, that's what they're making, like that's what they made as a balisette and what it sounds like. And I thought it was intriguing, and it felt like a little bit like other stringed instruments that aren't, traditional guitar kind of things. But I wish he hadn't been singing, like he's making up some kind of stupid poem about, being stuck in where he is at the time, rather than, in the books, Gurney is a
ballad.
poet. Like he's always singing something romantic or epic or whatever. And I think that would have been nice. But I love Josh Brolin. So like, I appreciated him. Like, it was nice to have him back in this one as well. So.
Yeah.
Okay, could I ask you guys? I mean, so I'm still, even after all the Dune stuff we've talked about, I'm still a little confused about this. So is Paul like, because it's very set up that he's sort of flawed or sinister toward the end of this movie, and I'm just wondering, what choice are we to understand that he was supposed to make? Like, what would have been the morally correct choice? Because it seems like he basically has the choice that he can go along with the jihad and everything, or the Harkonnens are going to slaughter all the Atreides, all the Fremen, and him and everyone he loves. So am I understanding correctly that was his choice? And are we meant to understand that the correct choice was to let the Harkonnens win? Or is there something about
I don't
this
think there is a
not
correct choice.
getting?
I think
There
it's
isn't,
a
yeah.
choice of evils, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
and I think he makes, like, the way I read it, he makes the right choice because he saves a whole people, but the result of that is then,
Billions dying.
Yeah. So, and I think that's
But, like,
that's
in-
kind
in
of
what-
brilliant though, because that's how there's never like easy way to do these things, right?
I don't understand, in what way is this meant to be a warning about not following charismatic leaders if Paul always makes the best choice under
I don't know
the
if it's, but that's the thing. I don't know if it's the best choice, but I think
It's the best choice for him. It's the choice for his survival, and he makes the choice to get his revenge. That's what he wants.
I think one of the things that I was thinking when I was watching it was I wish it had been more like, I wish there had just been one point at which where he said, he's so against like wanting to start this war, but I wanted to see him say, but I also want to save, I want these people to survive what's coming at them. And I think, I think you could probably argue that the Fremen could figure out a way to save themselves, but it wasn't as expedient as getting Paul to become the Lisan al-Gaib and like, unite everybody, including the fanatics from the south, and get millions of Fremen to fight back against the Harkonnens and the Emperor's forces. Because I think they had the numbers, right? They had the hate for the Harkonnens. They just needed something to, unite them and light that
Organize them.
fire.
I just feel like this could be clear. Like given how, if this is apparently the central theme of this entire series, I feel like it could be clearer, like what the choice is and what.
Yeah,
What's wrong?
I
with what he
don't
does.
I don't think Herbert was explicit. I mean, I'm not taking spice, but I would think that his choice could be not to lead them, and then his house would die, and the Fremen would probably be slaughtered, and the Harkonnens would rule Arrakis for how many future generations. And it's like, I think he's like, no, I don't want the Atreides line to die. I don't want the Fremen to be destroyed. But
You mean the Harkonnen line?
well, yes.
Yes.
but what I'm saying is, like, for him to survive means that there's going to be this jihad, this holy war that kills billions, and so it's like that's a terrible decision he has to make. And I think, yeah, I mean,
So you think it would have been better for him to let the Harkonnens win? Because then that would have prevented the 60 billion.
So I know we're getting way far ahead, but if you go down the lines of the books and you talk, you get into like his conversation with his son, basically, unless this terrible thing happens, humanity will go extinct.
Yeah, but he doesn't know that at the time.
And he doesn't know that at the time. Right.
But I think, I mean, I think Stilgar, the way that they play him in this, which is very different from the books, or at least it's way more, one part of Stilgar. And Stilgar more, I guess, later as he develops in later books as well. But I think he's part of that cautionary tale because it shows how he's been set up to just anything Paul does. Like, there's a meme now apparently going around where like anything Paul does, oh, the Lisan al-Gaib, like, oh, that's as it's written. But like, you see that because and I think he's making it explicit that the Bene Gesserit have set this up, and Jessica pushes Paul into it, which again is a slight change, but
it big change actually.
It fits in with, I think, what they're trying to do. And whether or not it's successful, you can say for sure that these, the people who have been led to believe that are not making a free and informed choice. They're sort of have been already sort of primed to do that. Yeah, manipulated. And so, and I think, I guess in the grander scheme of things, like, yeah, the Bene Gesserit still have a hand in all of this, right? And they're still working on it in later books and things. So, and honestly, Jessica, like in this one, she's basically sitting there in the shadows, like, twiddling her fingers together and with an evil smile, because she does orchestrate pretty much everything in this.
Overtly, where she starts talking about how we got to manipulate the weak ones, we got to use the fundamentalists. And
that's one of my only other like issues in some way, in that I feel like it spares Paul, like, because in the book I think Paul makes Paul comes up with a plan to become emperor and marry Irulan and use the houses of the Lanzarad in his favor and all of this stuff. And threatened to blow up the spice. And so that's him fully stepping into that role. But in this, I feel like Jessica becomes more of the mastermind and spares him some of the fallout of that. Like he takes the water of life, but he doesn't really have a huge choice. He's also being manipulated, I would say,
he makes a choice though.
Yeah, he makes that choice.
Yeah. Sure, but she even says to him, like, you need to see. And he's like, I need to see. And she's like, the only way you're going to see is if you do the water of life. And so he's basically, it's not like he has tons of options at that point in time.
I mean, one of the things that sort of struck a wrong note for me, and this might be, like I said, if I went back and watched it, I'd be like, I don't know why this bugged me. It's totally fine. But like, I felt like that last fight between Paul and Feyd-Rautha, that like it starts with, him forcing the emperor to kneel and kiss his ring. And then afterwards, he commands the Bene Gesserit to silence. And he's already, intimidated all the Fremen by telling them what they're thinking about and stuff, like reading their minds, basically. And then so there's all this like thematic stuff emphasizing how powerful Paul has become and how dangerous and dark and indomitable. And then in all that, he kind of like gets his ass kicked by Feyd-Rautha and happens to sort of win just by happenstance, it seems, or it's like kind of random. And it sort of seems to me it would have been more thematically consistent if like, Feyd-Rautha went into this fight totally confident because he just knows he's a better fighter than Paul. And then he just, is terrified to discover that Paul has just become something beyond human comprehension, something you can't fight.
Well, I have two answers to.
Okay.
I'm
basically done.
So, like, Feyd-Rautha is also the product of Bene Gesserit breeding. So he theoretically could be as powerful as Paul. And the other one is, I think that it shows Paul's humanity in the sense that he's not a perfect being. He's not flawless. And the fact that he is mortal, like that maybe he isn't a god, right? So that I think it works on both those levels for me, the fact that he almost dies. And I think, you could see it in Stilgar's face for a moment. He's like, oh, is my Messiah going to die? And then, no, he doesn't. Okay, he's still my Messiah. But like, I feel like it sets up the future stories a little better if has a flaw.
Yeah, but of course,
Andrea,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I thought was Andrea going to say something?
I was just going to agree that they talk a lot. The Reverend Mother talks about how they have different prospects when she's talking to Irulan and Margot about, we have other prospects for Kwisatz Haderach, and that one of them being the biggest one being Feyd. So I think that is the reason why they are so well matched, is because he is
right. But I'm talking less though about the in-universe explanation and more about just like the emotional effect that you're going for at the end of the movie, where it just seems like everything is emphasizing the darkness and power of Paul, except in this like one thing is like, oh, actually he gets his ass kicked in this fight right in the middle of there. So it just seems a little, I don't know, a little
right
weird to me.
Before he starts to get his ass kicked is when Feyd talks about Chani, and this is your little pet, and I'm going to have to give her special. So he hits Paul in a vulnerable spot, and you see him get emotional and angry. And I think that's, when they say about fights, you never go in angry. You got to go in there focused. I think he riles something up in Paul, and that's when he starts to get his ass kicked at that point.
Dave, you do raise an interesting point though, because it would be an interesting take to see, them starting out fighting normally, and then Paul actually, being able to see what Fade is going to do, like before he does it, and then being able to sort of use that against him in some way, because I think they downplay, they talk about him seeing and foretelling and seeing the future, possible futures, but and pasts obviously, but they don't really, I don't know. Again, to me, I have a different understanding of it from the books, and I don't feel like it's very well explained, and it's not very well used in many different ways, except he's seen a bunch of futures, and this is one of the ways that they can win, sort of like Doctor Strange from the Infinity War. But yeah, I don't know. I just think that could be a cool idea.
They also establish in the book that others who use, I don't think Fade is using spice necessarily, but there are blind spots, right? So
blind spots only for the guild and for the Bene Gesserit, but Paul's the one who can see everything. That was the whole.
That's only after he took the water of life.
Yeah. But I mean, at the end, he has taken it.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
And
they downplay a lot of stuff. Like Paul's Bene Gesserit training, other than the voice, the fact that the weirding way is completely left out, which is fine because they just are the Fremen are awesome at fighting automatically. But yeah, I mean, sorry. What were you saying, Matt? I interrupted you.
I was just thinking, and this is maybe I'm reading between the text, but Fade is the product of the, generations of Bene Gesserit breeding. And I wonder if the fact that he could be the Kwisatz Haderach is possibly why Paul can't foresee all of his moves and motions.
Oh,
but
yeah, no, I was going to agree with that, but it's something. It hits on something from the book in the last chapter which includes Count Fenring, and he talks about he couldn't see Count Fenring, and he wonders if it's because he was a failed Kwisatz Haderach.
Right, that's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I feel like now that we're talking about this, right, the Bene Gesserit's biggest. The reason they were so upset was because they wanted a Kwisatz Haderach that they could control, and they couldn't control Paul, right? So if they had it in Fade, then they knew already how to control him easily. So, yeah.
One other thing I want to talk about before we run out of time too much is another thing that sort of surprised me about this movie is how clearly the ending seemed to me to be setting up a sequel. I knew obviously that, Denis Villeneuve had a sequel, or, had a adaptation of Dune Messiah in mind, but this totally felt like the middle. It felt like Empire Strikes Back or something. It totally felt like the middle movie of a trilogy, more so than I was expecting. So
I thought it was interesting, that, because in this, the houses of the Landsraad show up and they're like, "We're gonna attack you." And in the books, Paul basically comes to an agreement with them, and becomes the emperor. In this one, he's just go attack them to the Fremen. Yeah. And so basically they jump to the jihad right away. It just starts happening right off the bat.
And that particular thing was the reason I went back and read the last chapter of Dune. And it's quite different. Yeah. Not just in tone, but in what happens. In the book, there's the guild navigators there. Yeah. And he's the one who says, if this doesn't happen, I'm going to destroy the spice. And he goes and he says, you go talk to the Landsraad, you tell them what's going to happen. And then they come back. They're like, okay, we're good. We're in with you.
Right.
And it always this is the thing that bugged me always a little bit about the book, which is I understand that your prophecies, or the thing you see is that there's going to be this war in your name, but I can never understand why he couldn't stop that in any way. Why couldn't he say, don't kill people in my name? But in the movie, it makes it clear. He says to the Landsraad, this is what's going to happen. And they say no. And so he makes the choice to start it himself.
Yeah.
And that's what made sense to me. He's not a passive player in this. And this is the problem that I think we talked about in Dune Messiah, is that the most of the book, he's just this passive character walking around moaning. He's Hamlet. He takes an active role here in setting up Dune Messiah, where he makes the choice to bring the fight to the rest of the universe. Yeah. And that's the chilling part. Lead them to paradise. That was like an incredibly chilling line.
In the books,
it was.
Right. He's always like, oh, they're going to start a jihad. They are going to start a jihad in my name. In this one, he freaking starts it by sending them. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question. So what I remember from the books is like, generally all the houses fall in line, because if you don't, the other houses would align against you and destroy you, right? Because collectively the houses are incredibly powerful. So if you have like the Landsrat, all the houses orbiting above Arrakis, and the Fremen, who are like powerful in the desert, they're powerful like on sandworms and attacking like, how are they going to do a space battle? Like that was the one thing. Like, let's go attack them in space. And I'm like,
are they boarding them? Are they? That's what I was thinking. Are they boarding?
With what ships? Or like do they even know how to fly ships? Like there were questions that I had about that. So I don't.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, I can like come up with reasons why it still works, but that's a really good point. Yeah.
Also, the whole thing about they mention in the book and the movie that if it ever got out that the Emperor supported the Harkonnens in wiping out the Atreides, that the houses of the Landsrod would rise up against him, and then at the end they're defending the Emperor. And I don't like, to me that seems like something that you could be like, okay, I have some evidence I need to share with you. Let's not start a war or whatever.
All right, so we're getting short on time, but so let's raise anything you really want to talk about. Let's get it in quick.
Well, I just wanted to talk about a couple of the changes that I thought were really stark. Specifically, the personality changes. Jessica, she takes the water of life, and she becomes a completely different person. Like, she's insane. Like right off the bat, she's crazy. And it's not just talking to the baby. It's the plotting, the evil in her face, and I think when we talked about Children of Dune, it was all about how Jessica's like the villain of that story. They really bring it out here. And when I went back and looked at the book, the last chapter, Jessica's still Jessica. She still cares about taking care of Paul and keeping Paul safe. This point, she doesn't care. She just was like, you have to go take the water of life. That's the first thing. Like, you have to do this too. And she doesn't care about, she doesn't express any fear for his life. And also in the book, she's afraid of Paul at the end.
Yeah.
There's several instances of her shuddering with fear. And she also gives a damn about Chani. She says to Paul, don't make my mistake. Go with love, be happy. And this version, she does not give a damn about Chani's feelings.
But she doubts that he is the Kwisatz Haderach in the book. Like, that's why she fears it, because if he's not, then he's going to die. And then he becomes this other thing, and he's mad at her too. But like this one, she's like, you got to take it, because she knows he's going to be one, I guess. So yeah.
There's something else though. It's almost like a mania that takes over her. She becomes a fundamentalist. It's such a stark change. Like, she's just a different person.
It is weird because she tells him not to, like, revenge is not, you know what I mean? Like, she cautions him against revenge.
Right, that's
but
before
like, why would
she takes the water of life.
Oh, because like I was like going to say, why would she wants him to be an instrument of revenge at that point. I mean, I think the movie is trying to say that she wants him to survive by like, if he becomes this god figure, then he will be protected and he will survive. But you're right. Her attitude completely changes.
I just think when you think about what Paul and Jessica are like in Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, it's like such a huge change from what they're like in the first book. And so I feel like they're trying to like
bring that in,
push things along the way a little bit more, because in a film you have so much less time to make those changes.
Well, at the end of the book, she goes back to Caladan, and I'm like, oh, how are they going to deal with those tattoos on her face? I mean, I'm sure they can wipe them off, but that's a stark change as well.
I don't think she's going to go back to Caladan. I don't think that's going to happen.
But I also feel like knowing that she turns on Alia essentially, or abandons Alia. At this point, they're so bonded, it seems like, with the talking and all that kind of stuff, that like that makes I have a harder time kind of seeing that happen naturally because of what we've seen already. But I don't mean there's another movie coming, I guess. I'm sure there'll be more movies after.
And also, I don't want to get into spoilers for the books because we didn't give a spoiler warning for.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Can I just briefly talk about the worm riding?
Yeah.
So, like the earlier adaptations, like the Lynch version and the sci-fi version, when they ride the worms, I'm like, okay, that looks difficult. It's like, a rock wall in a gym. Like, it's really hard, but I could probably do it. In this movie, I'm like, no way. There is no way that I'd be able to, like, just the speed of it and the enormity of it and the amount of like how do they even see where they're going? There's so much sand blowing around and
spice
blowing around.
I'm saying they can see with the spice, through like the navigator. Sorry,
right.
It was a dumb comment.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But no, I just thought that was so cool, and especially like we said, the final battle scene when they're riding the worms into battle and they're flying the Atreides flag, and you're
God,
holy cow!
That
like I got chills.
That's the scene. That scene made me cry.
But that scene. Sorry, the first scene you mentioned, Matt, with the worm, I thought, like, because I knew it was coming and I knew what was going to happen. I knew he was going to succeed, but I was like, I was still somehow engaged with it. Like, and I think they handled it so well with everyone watching. And then like you see the sand cloud and everyone's like, oh God, like that's a huge one. And, like, again, I knew he was going to succeed because I've read the book multiple times. I knew that's how the story goes, but I was still sort of like excited when he did. Like, and I think you're right. Like the scale of it was handled well. And just, again, sometimes it's those little details of the hook going into, the gap between the plates and then pulling it, like that all was perfect, I think. And then it just makes you feel better when he's like, he just rode like, the biggest sandworm that anyone's ever seen. So.
And apparently it took them 2 months just to film that one scene, the worm riding scene. They had a whole special, like a whole second unit kind of thing, just for filming that one scene.
Can I just say one little like nitpick that I have, just in terms of, again, epic scope, everything, like if I agree with most of this, like everything is sort of kind of amazingly done. I think one of the things that bugged me is that, especially, I think it's when Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya talk, it's like they both sound like American teenagers, and they're from two vastly different cultures, two different planets. And there's just a colloquial way of talking, which I get is approachable for audiences and makes sense. And they probably don't put on accents, just speak the way you speak. But there was something about the feudal nature of this society that there was a slight little like, that bugged me. And that's just me being a purist. So
yeah, no, I get that.
I hate old timey talk, so I like being able to relate to the characters. So I appreciate.
How
that.
canst thou say that?
Yeah, no, God, please don't do that.
I'll just say, like, just how happy I am that this has been, I feel like, such a win for science fiction movies. That like it's been literal years, it feels like, since there was a science fiction movie that was a big hit in theaters and was a cultural phenomenon and stuff like that. And like it's even hard to remember now, but if you'll remember, like there was a point at which the studio was going to release the first part just on HBO Max. Oh, yeah. I don't know if you remember that. Not in theaters at all, which would have meant no part 2 at all. And like, can you imagine if that had happened, if they had just released part 1 on HBO Max and they had never made this movie? Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What a tragedy.
Yeah. Did anyone get a sandworm popcorn?
No.
I did not. I did not. But I did. I went to the Alamo Draft House and they had like a special Dune menu, so
Of course.
I saved the menu.
Oh, can I point?
Well,
Sorry,
let me just like, if you're listening to this, you don't know about the sandworm popcorn bucket. It's been like a whole thing. Like it looks like a sex toy, basically.
Yeah,
you know,
it does.
it's like this worm mouth. You know, and so like, there's this really funny. If you haven't seen it, there's this really funny Saturday Night Live like musical number about it. And there's been like the sandworm popcorn bucket challenge where the one I saw was with Josh Brolin. I think there's other ones too where they like sort of dare them to reach inside, and people are really apprehensive about sticking their hands into
It's
this
like a
stuff.
Flash Gordon crossover.
Yeah.
Right? Spare me the madness.
Andrea, you were going to say something.
I just have one thing that occurred to me that made me so happy. You know, the division between the two Fremen, the two groups of Fremen, the young people who don't believe in the prophecies, and the older fundamentalists who are just like Lisa Nagaib. It slowly Paul wins everybody over. And finally, Chani's the last person standing going, this is insane. This is how they're controlling us. Can't you see this? And it occurred to me that she's like this story's Cassandra.
Mm-hmm.
She's the prophetess who's telling them their doom, and they're not believing her. And she's saying, you know, don't drag that freaking horse through the walls of Troy because it's going to kill us all. And then it was like, I remembered that, you know, in Children of Dune, spoiler, sorry, the Atreides trace their lineage back to ancient Greece, and specifically Agamemnon. And I was like, oh my God, was this deliberate? I hope it was. But it's like, and you know, so the Atreides are the Greeks and the Fremen are the Trojans, and it just lines up so perfectly for, you know, like geeky Greek mythology, classics, science fiction person me.
Do you guys think that Chani's like basically pregnant at this point in time? She goes off and has the kids elsewhere because I can't see her coming back to Paul now, right? So yeah,
there's going to have to be some serious change to how this plays out, and I can't wait to see how he solves the problem. Yeah. And I do think she's pregnant. Yeah, I feel like the Dune Messiah movie is going to be like so different from the book. Like it's going to be like 80% different from the book. But is that a bad thing? Because
no, not at all. No, that's a 100% good thing.
Yeah,
right.
It was funny. I wanted to read. I mean, I sent this to you guys, but there was this really funny viral tweet a couple months ago. Philip Masiak, he says, Denis Villeneuve prays every night before he goes to bed that David Zaslav, that's the CEO of the studio, neither reads the Dune novels nor looks up their plot summaries on Wikipedia.
Nice. God, that guy sucks. Not
I don't
the
think
tweet
there's
guy, the other guy.
No, there's Zaslav.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any danger of that. I don't think that man has any interest in story or just dollars and cents.
I mean, if this
he's
thing
going to
makes,
look at this and it's going to make more.
If this thing makes as much money as it's going to make, then he's going to like green light
anything.
12 more Dune films.
Yeah, Dune universe.
So, Andrea, you're seeing Dune. Like, is Dune still sold out this week, or how is it?
No, we're going in the middle of the day, so there's other people in the audience, but it's not packed. So we can have my choice of chair that I like specifically.
I mean, so the first movie made 400 million, and this is currently projected to make somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 800 million.
Apparently it has to hit 500 million just to break even, which is insanity because it only cost 180 or 190 to make, which yes, a huge amount of money, but in this scale, making this perfect movie for $190 million is pretty outstanding. But the fact that it has to make 500 million to break even is that's like crazy Hollywood accounting once again.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Josh Brolin and the cinematographer did a book. I mean, I guess they did a book for part 1 and they did a book for part 2 that's like photographs of them in the desert and some maybe words. I don't even know much about it, but I read about it and I think like this is one of those rare things where I want to pick those up and take a look at them because I think they're probably beautiful.
I saw some of the pictures. They're stunning. Yeah. They're just beautiful photographs. Yeah, I don't need any more coffee table books in my house, but maybe.
I also bought a book that is the story behind the making of David Lynch's Dune that is sitting downstairs for me to take a look at. So, I mean, but you know, you can never have enough Dune, right?
Yeah.
Right, David? Right?
But
Yeah, I mean, well, there's so much more we can say, but yeah, we seriously need to start wrapping this up. So,
Okay.
like, I am going to insist we start getting into some final thoughts. So Andrea, how about some final thoughts on Dune Part 2?
You know, all of my thoughts are rather deep, and I'm going to be here for a while. And since we're already running over, you don't want to hear them. All I can say is this was one of the most affecting film experiences, cinematic experiences I've ever had in my life. I have now paid for it to see it twice in a theater. I will be paying for it the third time tomorrow. I have never done that. I've never seen a movie twice in the theater, and now I'm doing it 3 times. And I don't think that I don't feel bad about it. I don't feel weird about it. I feel kind of weird about it. But I've been a little obsessive the way I was when I was a teenager, but that's a good thing. Like, it's bringing back for me the joy I felt the first time I read this book and read this story. And that's the magic of filmmaking. And God bless Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah, I mean, actually, one other thing I wanted to mention is that this movie is, like I said, you know, like Blade Runner 2049, we said was like, it was like this art house movie that was just totally brilliant, but didn't do that great at the box office. And I was really afraid that Denis Villeneuve's Dune would be sort of the same thing, that it would be this sort of, it was originally described, or like early, before it came out, it was described as like a brutalist nightmare. And I was like, this doesn't sound like it's going to be like a crowd pleasing, you know, thing. And just the fact that movie and this movie, which is even darker and even more challenging and even more like long and weird and everything, the fact that it seems to have been embraced so fervently by a mass audience, just to me is such an encouraging sign that you can make a big budget, serious science fiction movie and not have to dumb it down and not have to make it like a quote unquote crowd pleaser. Mm-hmm. And so like, yeah, I think people have just maybe not been giving audiences credit that people will go to see this sort of movie, even if it's 3 hours long and has a downer ending and everything, if it's good. And, you know, and so it's just another reason I love this movie and the phenomenon of this movie.
It didn't feel like 3 hours to me. I was like, at all.
No, when it ended, I was like, oh, no.
Yeah,
I want more.
Exactly that. I went right home and I started Googling, but I also put on this first movie and just sat there and watched it. Like I didn't want to leave.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Raj, final thoughts?
No, I mean, I think it's a stunning, epic movie, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. I don't think it'll be anytime soon because I think I need to kind of wait a little while for that initial viewing to wash off of me. But I am as a Dune fan, I'm excited that a lot of people are getting introduced to it. I'm looking forward to what they do with the third movie, and I'm just like, yeah, it's kind of exciting to see this kind of stuff. Also to have certain things enter the modern vernacular that I've sort of had in my head for a long time. You know, just even stuff about spice and sandworms and things. So it's kind of exciting, and I'm happy, like you said, like I'm happy to see stuff like this succeed, because you know that's great. Stuff that we love finally, you know, finding an audience and being done well is always great.
Yeah, and again, we are planning to do more Dune panels. Let's see, we've got our Children of Dune sci-fi miniseries that we're planning to review. And then God Emperor of Dune book club is on the schedule. So any Dune thoughts that you guys have, you know, don't forget them, save them for next time. We'll definitely have more opportunities to talk about Dune.
Should we call ourselves the Doonies?
Yeah, that works for me. But Matt, final thoughts on Dune Part 2?
Yeah, I mean, like Andrea, I think I can count on one hand the number of movies I've seen twice in the movie theater. And one of them was Blade Runner 2049. I've only seen this once, but I am absolutely going to see it again in the theater before it leaves. I need to see this on an IMAX or a giant screen. Yeah. And to those listening, I would say you absolutely must see this in the theater. It is like an experience, and I don't think it's something that could be replicated at home. You have to just be there in the desert, riding the sandworm, wind in your face, sand in your face, along for the ride with the Fremen. And I love this film, and I want others to love it too. And it sounds like, at least from the reactions I've been seeing online, that people do. So I'm excited about that for all the reasons that everybody mentioned.
That'd be a good ride the sandworm, you know?
Oh, it's coming, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to see this in IMAX as soon as I can. Hopefully not in the first row.
I'll put in a plug for that Dolby thing, because that was kind of amazing. And I guess it's smaller than IMAX, but it's still pretty big. So
yeah, I saw it on a pretty big thing, but I want to see it on the biggest possible thing.
A sandworm's back.
Yeah. All right, so let's wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Rajan Khanna. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Rajan Khanna for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks, or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.